Natalie, you have no idea what you just bought. This represents everything that you talk about, that you want to fight for, this mission that you want to make the world a more fair place. We do have a system where schools and universities sort of program you to think in a way that benefits the centralized government. I'm a big believer that we shouldn't have heroes. The core of Bitcoin is to separate money from state. Sure. But you just don't want to have heroes, because even heroes will disappoint you. That's why I'm really inspired by this community, and why, you say I'm the Energizer Bunny. I'm working so hard. I really believe in this. Open up your mind to something that could potentially solve a lot of the problems that exist today.
It's Mark Yegge here, wealth architect and lifestyle investor. Let's take your life to the next level. Welcome to the Wealth Architect Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Wealth Architect Podcast. So glad you're here today. We have a very special guest. She is a podcast host, educator, media commentator on all things Bitcoin, basically. Her popular show, Coin Stories, which I highly recommend if you're into podcasts, features interviews with Bitcoin thought leaders about their backgrounds and conviction in Bitcoin. She also hosts a Bitcoin-focused news show called Hard Money, another great show on YouTube and other places, produced by Swan Studios. I think she's one of the foremost authorities on Bitcoin. Today, I welcome Natalie Brunell. Welcome, Natalie. Hi.
Hi. Oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you so much. I appreciate those words.
My pleasure. I know you've been traveling a bit. Tell us a bit about that, and then we'll jump into your story a bit.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. It's a bear market, and yet there are Bitcoin conferences popping up all over the world with, a jam-packed house of people really excited to talk about Bitcoin, share their passion, and really help educate the public about Bitcoin. So I just came back from Europe. I was there for a couple of weeks. I went to 4 different conferences. I started in Amsterdam, then I went to Bulgaria, Scotland, and finished up in Lugano, Switzerland. So Bitcoin adoption is spreading around the world.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it. I think you're like the Energizer Bunny, because I follow you on Twitter and I know kind of where you are. And I'm like, man, she's all over the place. It's really amazing. But we're on the same mission to try to educate people about this amazing technology, this amazing energy. And I'm excited about it. But what I'd like to do today is go into a bit of macro, because I know you interview a lot of people on your show about it. And I think you're probably, just because you interview them and because you have such an interest in Bitcoin and how it affects the world, I think you really understand macro well, certainly from the questions you asked. And then we can go into how Bitcoin benefits investors and from the macro environment, and then how investors can themselves benefit. But I'd like to start a bit with your story, because I know that your family is kind of the American dream. You're a daughter of some Polish immigrants. So let's start there. Mm-hmm. And then maybe kind of tell us how you were, quote unquote, orange pilled and you became a Bitcoin fan.
Sure. Thanks so much. Well, I think I'm an American dream story in progress. I think a lot of people would argue that the American dream has become more difficult to achieve. It's still better here than in so many other places, but the goalpost keeps moving because the cost of everything around us gets more and more expensive, right? So you come here with this dream, you work hard, you want to be a part of the vibrant middle class that America was always known for. And then all of a sudden you find yourself having trouble affording education for your kids or your retirement. And that's really the reality I saw. My family came here in 1991 from Poland, and I saw my parents work so hard. I mean, I come from a scarcity background, not an abundance background. And I saw them work hard enough to afford their first house. They were always really good at saving, but they didn't know how to invest. They weren't familiar with the stock market like so many immigrants. They, saved in cash, or my mom was also a gold bug. And then the financial crisis hit. And just as quickly as they felt like they had made it, they lost it overnight. And so at that point, I just remember I was in college and I was graduating into the recession, and my first job offers were offering me less per hour than my high school internships because things had changed so quickly.
Crazy.
And I just had this seed planted in the back of my mind that something was wrong with the system. I mean, how could that happen? That my parents were playing by the rules, paid their taxes. They were good people. They didn't want to achieve anything extraordinary. They weren't out there seeking, a yacht on the Mediterranean. They just wanted the white picket fence and an education for their kids. And all of a sudden they lost it and they were struggling and starting over again. And so I wondered, is that just because they're immigrants? And I entered into a news career with sort of that in the background, sort of thinking, why is this system so unfair? Why did the Wall Street folks get bailed out and they still got bonuses and 10 million Americans lost their homes? That doesn't seem fair, right? And so I became a news reporter. And I reported on everything. I did breaking news and investigative for the majority of my career. And what I saw over that decade after the financial crisis was a growing polarization of our country. I'm sure everyone can attest to that, especially with what they see in the media, a growing polarization and division. And what I found to be so interesting is that regardless of whether people were on the red side or the blue side, the core frustration was the same. It was this feeling of frustration that people were left behind. They weren't represented. They weren't achieving what they wanted to achieve. My peers, I'm a millennial. We find it harder and harder to be able to afford a house like, the previous generation or the boomers could. And so I just thought, God, like, why is it like this in America, the country that represents the American dream, opportunity, freedom? And then in 2017, I first heard about Bitcoin while I was a local news reporter. And like so many people, I totally dismissed it. I was like, this is a stock. This is, it's digital. It could go to zero. I could lose it. Someone could hack it. I just didn't get it. And I wish I could go back in time and shake myself because I was like a good saver. I could have definitely bought more Bitcoin than I have now. But I just kind of dismissed it. And then I had a mentor who has really shaped a lot of the way I think in terms of markets and investing that I met through my news career. And I just randomly told him, I bought this Bitcoin thing. And he went on Amazon, bought the Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. And then he came back to me and said, Natalie, you have no idea what you just bought. This like represents everything that you talk about, that you want to fight for, this mission that you want to make the world a more fair place. And I go, what are you talking about? Bitcoin? I don't understand. So I finally, I put it off. I thought it was like a computer programming book or computer science. And I go, I'm not a techie person. I'm not going to be interested in that. Then finally I sat down, I read the Bitcoin Standard, and it was really this like aha moment for me, because for those of you who haven't read it, and I really highly recommend it, it's a history of money. It's really a deep dive into our financial system, what's broken about it, and why there's so much wealth disparity, and how Bitcoin presents a solution through technology. And it was just like this moment where I go, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. And this is why all of these problems exist that I've been reporting on and that my family suffered. And so I decided to just, learn as much as I can, and then eventually start a podcast as a hobby. And I had no idea it would become my career. But I guess, when you find something you're super passionate about, it just like pulls you in deeper and deeper. And I don't know where down the rabbit hole I am, but I'm pretty deep.
Well, we're so fortunate that you are, because you are doing a great service to a lot of people. And we are so far back on the S-curve of adoption that, we're at the beginning. And so if we can get the word out, and you are a great voice to get the word out, mainstream media is picking you up, and you're really doing a phenomenal job
thank you.
In actually boiling it down to really crystal clear things. So I don't want to just thank you. I want to thank that mentor who actually took the stuff out of Safe's book and really, converted you, because that's pretty insightful, especially at a time where people are like, oh, it's a bubble and all that kind of stuff. Because I was right there in 2017. Right.
Yeah, totally. And it's something interesting about the space too, because I'm a big believer in surrounding yourself with people who are smarter, more successful, people who you can always learn from. And that's really what I found in the Bitcoin community. I know one thing that I know I had innately was just a curiosity. I was always a learner. I love to just grow in knowledge. And so I think journalism fit me and my personality. But, entering into the Bitcoin space, I learned how much I didn't know. And I had to unlearn a lot of things that I thought to be true about the current system, how it works, inflation. And it's just been this beautiful experience where I feel like I'm crowdsourcing an MBA, a master's in Bitcoin, if you will. So I'm super grateful.
Yeah. Well, you were wise enough to be flexible and say, okay, the society programs us with these, we get to learn a lot about the Pythagorean theorem and Romeo and Juliet, as I always say on my podcast, but we don't know a lot about taxes, investing, inflation, the Fed, buying a car, having a relationship, nothing that really we use on our daily basis. So
True.
we have to unlearn a lot of things that we know. So let's jump into the macro environment a little bit. Speaking of unlearning, because there is a whole load of programming that we've been experiencing as not just American citizens, but as worldwide citizens. What's your overall theory about economics? It's a loaded question, but are you a Keynesian, a monetary theorist, MMT, or are you a free market sound money person? I know the answer, but.
Well, it's interesting. If you would have asked me this 3 years ago, I would say I have no idea half the words you just said to me.
Right.
Which I hope, people find kind of inspiring, because you can really gain this knowledge on your own now. And we do have a system where schools and universities sort of program you to think in a way that benefits the centralized government that we have right now, the concentrated power. So now I can kind of safely say that I do ascribe to more of an Austrian school of economics. I believe in free markets and capitalism, where there's equal opportunity, but not necessarily equal outcome. And that's what I really hope Bitcoin will bring about, is through sound money, sort of at the base layer of an economy. We now are judged by the value we bring to the table, and goods and services can freely trade. And we don't have that. And when most of us have really never even imagined a world like that, because we have nothing to compare it to. The gold standard hasn't been around for decades. And even under the gold standard, that was sort of, taken advantage of, because people essentially gave out more paper notes than there actually was gold in reserves. And so, to imagine that we have this immutable record where every single 10 minutes, every single Bitcoin is accounted for, it's really, truly extraordinary. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to picture a world outside of the paradigm that we currently know, but it's truly one that I believe has more abundance and prosperity and opportunity, as opposed to this one, which pools wealth with the very, very few, and creates sort of these silos where we divide and we kind of have to battle one another because we're fighting in a scarcity environment.
Right.
And so I'm definitely a sound money person, a hard money person now.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I was pretty sure the answer was that. You want to have a little fun?
Sure.
So I have some Fed quotes that I'd like to throw at you, and I'll just throw them all out, and then we can comment at the end if you want. All right. And the reason I'm saying this is because last week I sat in front of the TV for just a few minutes prior to 2:00 on Tuesday, I believe it was. And we all, like the traders and investors around Wall Street, all kind of waited for Jerome Powell, who's the Fed chairman, to make his announcement, right? He's the most powerful man in the world. It's ridiculous that we have one guy in charge of most of the money of the world, basically. And then I was looking at CNBC, and I very rarely watch it, but I just happened to want to tune in just to see the ridiculosity of it. And it was, imminent Fed decision. It was just, one of those things to grab your eyeballs. Everything was red and like you had to look. And there was an anchor. And then there were three experts, and the experts, he was asking like what the Fed guy was going to say in 5 minutes. I'm like, what has news become? This is not even news. It's just, what do these experts think that this guy is going to say in 5 minutes? So that's laying down these quotes. So Chairman Bernanke, who just won a Nobel Prize in economics, said in 2007, May 17th, "We do not expect significant spillovers from the subprime market to the rest of the economy or to the financial system." On October 2007, Bernanke also said, "It's not the responsibility of the Federal Reserve, nor would it be appropriate to protect lenders and investors from the consequences of their financial decisions." And we know what happened after that, right? He bailed everybody out. In 2008, 2 months before Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac collapsed, you were probably in college then, and were nationalized, he said, "They will make it through the storm." In 2010, December 10th, one myth that's out there is that what we're doing is printing money. We're not printing money. It's amazing. In 2000, so there's all this double speak that these guys speak. And then in 2000, a prior Chairman Alan Greenspan says, this is one of my favorite quotes. "I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure that you realize what you heard is not what I meant." So, that's just awesome. And in June of 22, Janet Yellen, who's now the Treasury Secretary, back then she was the successor to Bernanke, she said she was wrong about inflation. And then, of course, we know Jerome Powell said inflation was transitory in June of 2021, and certainly walked it back 6 months later and said, we're going to stop using the word transitory because it doesn't apply and we were wrong. So what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really sad, right? We have political leaders who are doing more PR than they are doing a service to the people of this nation who work so hard. And I agree with you that we basically have one person in charge of the money, which again, it's so backwards from what I believe to be a system that would actually create abundance and prosperity. I think that history doesn't repeat, but it certainly does rhyme. So we need to learn the lessons. And I try to be a very positive person. Like I tend to want to believe that people are acting more out of ignorance than malice. But you have to wonder, I mean, these are folks that are at the Federal Reserve with, I don't know, thousands of PhD economists under them. How much do they know and what are they really sharing? And I understand that there's an element of you don't want to create sort of panic and everything sort of hinges on this monopoly-like system that we now have, this fiat Ponzi, as some people refer to it in the Bitcoin space. And so you do have to be kind of careful. But it really is sad because I also am someone who morality and integrity is very important to me. And I want people to strive to be their best and to have opportunity and to achieve, and for us to have a system that's better for everyone, again, based on value, based on meritocracy. And we really don't have that in this system. So I wonder, what do they really think? What do they really know versus what they're really saying? And I just urge people, to be cautious and you can't believe everything that you hear, because a lot of it is just PR, and it's people maintaining the positions of power that they have, right? There's a fear in having people overtake the position that you have. And so I think it's a lot of how they're acting is out of kind of survival mode and out of maintaining and preserving the position and the roles that they have. And so our realities are what we create them, right? We tell ourselves stories every single day. And so I don't know what stories the Federal Reserve officials are telling themselves, but it's a story that reinforces their positions on all of the things that they're doing within the economy. So I obviously very much disagree with it. And we've learned from history that they'll say one thing and do another. And at the end of the day, what I always come back to is, I know we're in a bear market and we can talk about the volatility and the macro environment and all that, but the question is just timing. They have to print because of the amount of debt that we have. No question. So, we're all kind of going around in circles, but the writing is on the wall. We have sealed our own fate by going this far into debt. There's very little they can do. And I think that Jerome Powell has shown that, inflation hasn't come down enough. Employment's not bad enough. He's going to keep pushing and maintaining this hawkish stance. And he's willing to break things, because when they break things, because ultimately they probably will, they're going to come back in and print. And so it's just, the whole thing is kind of funny to me, because I just feel like we're talking in circles at some point. And thank goodness we have something like Bitcoin, because that's the one thing that I think can save us from this debt spiral that we're in.
Well, so I want to ask you two more questions about the Fed, and then I want to switch to Bitcoin, because what if there were no Fed is my first question. And then I want to tell you a theory that I have about the Fed and Bitcoin. But what if there were no Fed? What do you think?
Well, I actually see why a lot of people are fighting to end the Fed. I think Ron Paul started that, perhaps. I think he has a book titled End the Fed, and there are some politicians out there that agree with that stance. I believe in smaller government. I really do. I think that the founding fathers were really smart in how they created this vision of an economy that was based on people's pursuit of happiness and greatness. And we've lost a lot of that. I feel like sometimes when I watch the news, it's almost like freedom is a bad word, especially in the last 2 years. And it's like, what? Freedom is one of the values that this country was built upon. And really just this pursuit of making your life better and going after what you want to achieve, and helping build communities around those values. So I would love to see a smaller government that doesn't have a monopoly over money. And I know that the global reserve currency has given us a lot of the privilege and wealth that we do have. But the truth of the matter is we are increasingly in a more borderless society, especially with the digital world, right? I wonder what it's going to look like 20, 30, 40 years from now, because why do we have a global reserve currency? Why is there one country that wields this power? That's not a free market. And that's something that I think will change. And it's something that I wouldn't be against, to be honest with you, because again, I think that people should have opportunity no matter where they come from, no matter what your background is. So yeah, I'm for that idea, but I also don't think it can happen overnight. And I'm not for quick, shifts that would be, that would cause seismic changes and affect people in a really negative way. So I would be for an end to the Federal Reserve, but at the same time, it's like you can't leapfrog, right? You need something to think, and I think Bitcoin kind of provides us this, but we need like an arc to usher people onto as the flood comes, as opposed to just telling people, you know what, you're cut off. And I think we don't do that enough. We also don't do that with energy enough in our country, right? It's like leapfrog over to solar and wind. Well, come on, like let's take this reasonably and have a little bit more common sense.
And those kinds of decisions put people in peril. You see what's going on in Europe.
Completely.
What's going on with us now. We have inflation and you have people talking out of two sides of their mouth. We're doing the best we can on inflation. And at the same time, they come out and say, we're not allowing any drilling, right? Like within 24 hours of one speech. So,
yeah, exactly.
All right, here's my theory. Ready? I'm going to see what you think. So the Fed can print unlimited money, right? The printer goes burr. And so they just print out unlimited money. So what if the Fed is shorting Bitcoin? I mean, Bitcoin, by the way, everybody hasn't really moved in 6 months. It's been like between 18 and 22,000 for 6 months. Hasn't really moved. If it's such a great, inflation hedge and store of value, and it's got all these great properties, why do you think it's not moving? And so I kind of came up with this theory that maybe they're borrowing and they're just shorting it with unlimited money to keep it down. What do you think? Because everybody's saying we should own Bitcoin as a Fed, but what if they're shorting? What if they're going the other way?
I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I do think that there are some interesting things happening that we don't know about yet. Look at the hash rate. It is at an all-time high, and it's making it not profitable at this point right now for some miners. And so there are some challenges there. But I'm not sure. I think that there are a lot of questions about, regulatory risk, especially when it comes to institutions. I think just there's a lack of education and awareness and understanding about it. I think we're just in a bear market in general, and with liquidity draining out. And so I'm actually proud of how resilient Bitcoin has been. That isn't to say it can't go lower, but it has been more resilient than even some major stocks that are very popular and equities that a lot of people own. So I'm really not sure. I'd be curious to know if there are countries right now buying it. I think so. I think that at all times, there's something happening under the surface that we're not really aware of. But I also, again, like to be positive about what the U.S. is going to do in order to maintain sort of the advantage that we have. And I think that there are smart people within the U.S. government who know and understand Bitcoin and how it could really help us maintain a position of power. So I'm hopeful about that, but you never know. I don't know. I'd love to know.
Hey there, it's Mark Yegge. I hope you're enjoying the show. Say, if you're interested in becoming involved in crypto technology, especially Bitcoin, but don't know how to go about it, I have some resources for you to go over on my website, wealtharchitectpodcast.com. And if you're a high net worth investor, I have something built especially for you and my other accredited investors. It's a fund specifically dedicated to the exciting future of Bitcoin and crypto. It's called the IntelliGrowth Digital Fund. Hey, listen, I know that if you haven't dedicated a few hundred hours to learning what's going on in Bitcoin space, it can be overwhelming. And that's why me and my team have spent thousands of hours determining the best way to invest, whether it's payment networks, storage, Bitcoin as a currency or a store of value, or even just how this technology is changing the world. I firmly believe that Bitcoin and crypto technology is here to stay. So you might as well have some exposure to it before it really takes off. I always tell my investors that we are all going to need to understand Bitcoin. The only question is whether you do it now, while it's also a great investment, or later when billions of people are using it every day, kind of like the internet. Anyway, if you want to find out how to be an investor, drop me a line here, mark@wealtharchitectpodcast.com, and we could see if it's right for your portfolio. Now, back to the show. I don't think the people there are stupid. So maybe they're doing stuff that we don't know, especially because they talk out of both sides of their mouths. But I've been to 8 countries this year, and 2 of them are interesting. One of them was Turkey, and I went to Turkey basically on behalf of my investors to kind of experience hyperinflation. So I wanted to see what was going on there, and it's devastating what's going on. They got 85% official hyperinflation there, but it's really more like, 150. The stories I was hearing when I was there were just horrible. And I think it could be the shades of what are going to, things are going to be coming here if we continue to do what we're doing. But I also went to El Salvador and I stayed on El Zante Beach, and
nice.
I had a blast, and I didn't listen to all the people that go, don't go down there, MS-13, and they're going to kidnap you and all this stuff. And I went, and I've never felt safer in probably almost any country that I went to. But those of you who don't know, Bitcoin is being adopted right alongside the US dollar as a replacement for the US dollar, because President Nayib Bukele, who is really an inspiring leader, has basically said, we're hooking our caboose to the US dollar, and we don't see that they're doing that great a job. And so he said, why don't we just adopt Bitcoin? And he made a huge move for that country. What do you think about what they're doing down in El Salvador?
I think it's really inspiring, and I think it's really progressive, and I think it's a risk that was worth taking, especially with all of the problems that they had with both their currency, but also what was happening within their economy and society. I was down there twice earlier this year, and it's interesting. I saw a very, very distinct juxtaposition. I went to El Zante and I saw Bitcoin sort of immersed in the community. People were familiar with it. Maybe they didn't understand the full technicality behind it, or had an intense knowledge about how it functioned and how, in my opinion, risk-free it sort of is as a mathematical certainty.
Yeah.
But they were used to using it in commerce, and even had this concept of, I should put some away and start to save. But then I also went to San Salvador. I had a chance to actually sit down and meet with President Bukele. And within San Salvador, the more populated area where the mercados are and all the merchants, people were much more afraid of it. They were more critical of the Chivo wallet. They all actually really liked Bukele, though. I mean, literally, I was there. It's not like I talked to the whole country or city, but everyone I would meet, I would say, "Do you like Bukele? What do you think? What do you think of him?" And they all, not one person had something negative to say about him. They thought that he was making the country a better, safer place.
Well, he's got a 95% approval rating there, so it's hard to find somebody that doesn't like him, right?
Yeah. And at the same time, though, I'm a big believer that we shouldn't have heroes. And there is, I mean, the core of Bitcoin is to separate money from state, right? And you never know someone's true intention. So I'm always cautiously optimistic about folks like him, and even Elon Musk with Twitter. Sure. But you just don't want to have heroes, because even heroes will disappoint you. So what I think is that as Bitcoin grows in adoption, that bet is going to really pay off for the country, and it will provide more opportunity. It will provide more investment. And, it's frustrating that the mainstream media and my former kind of colleagues in the business, they are reporting on, that this bet didn't pay off. There's a $60 million loss on the Bitcoin purchase of El Salvador. Well, why don't you look at the other side of the math, sure, which is that their GDP went up by 10%. And so basically it went up by billions, whereas they lost 60 million. So what I would argue that they made a pretty good bet, actually. So I know that the media is sort of skewed right now against El Salvador. I'm really hopeful, and sitting down with President Bukele, he seemed very genuine to me that he wants to make the country a better place where people have more access to opportunity and can trade and interact and provide value among one another, so that they can dream sort of an El Salvador dream, as opposed to all of them needing or wanting to come to the US and then send money back, which is basically what the situation was. I mean, when I was a reporter, I covered the border crisis. A lot of people were coming in from El Salvador because they needed to come for economic opportunity. And then a lot of them would send money back. In fact, I met people in El Zante at a place called Hope House, who now, because of Bitcoin, they were changing that pattern. They were saying, I used to want to go to the US, or I was in the US sending money back. Now I want to be here because there's more opportunity here, and I can build and grow within my own community and support the people that I grew up with, and I want to build a family here. And so that was inspiring. That's really hopeful. So I'm excited for what El Salvador is doing, and I can't wait to see when Bitcoin achieves sort of its destiny, what that country looks like.
I was in Greece a couple of years ago, and my friend had a live-in housekeeper from Romania, and she would work her butt off in Greece, taking care of the house, and she lived there, and then she would send all of her money back to her daughter in Romania. And I started to hear stories about that. First of all, it's not as easy as just wiring it, because Western Union, as an example, would take a huge amount of money. What they do is they give cash to the bus drivers, and the bus drivers drive it across the borders, and then they take their cut. And then a lot of people started to find out that there's bus drivers with a whole bunch of cash. So they started to rob the buses. And when I started to think about Bitcoin, to me, that was an obvious solution. It was an amazing solution for that person. And, Michael Saylor would say a $50, phone with an app on it for free, you can move your money 100%. With no transaction costs at the speed of light, right? And
100%. Yeah, I mean, that's what's also cool is you see the use cases in real time in other places. Actually, here we've had our 60-40 portfolio and we're used to this concept of saving. People actually need Bitcoin, the utility value, and in real time in so many other places. I interviewed a woman who was using Bitcoin to help people escape when Afghanistan was taken over by the Taliban in Ukraine. I have a girlfriend who is doing human rights work. And so using Bitcoin to help refugees move into Poland and get the supplies that they needed, move their savings and wealth from one country to another. I'm from Eastern Europe. My family has helped my family back in Poland. Earlier in my career, I dated someone from Argentina. Argentina has suffered from terrible inflation, and they would have a similar thing. They had like a family member that would fly to the US and actually take money back to the country. I mean, it's just wild. And so those pain points, I think, make Bitcoin more easy to understand for people actually in the developing world or outside of the country than even here.
What do you think are the big advantages of Bitcoin? Not going to that specific one, because that's certainly an advantage. I mean, you can't swing a dead cat around the United States without hitting a few banks, right? So, we know that it's certainly a benefit for the unbanked. And I think that's why I'm amazed by people in El Salvador who have understood the benefits of the technology. I mean, I don't know exactly how radio works. I know that when I tune it, I get to hear cool music, but I don't need to know how it works. And I think that's great for them. They're like, I don't know how it works, but I just sold a pupusa for, how many Satoshis or whatever, right? They don't care. They're getting paid. But what do you think is maybe the biggest advantage of Bitcoin, probably as an investment? What do you think?
I just personally think that the fact that it is not subject to inflation and cannot be controlled or manipulated the way that our current money is the biggest selling point for me. This idea that I can purchase it and lock away this sort of digital energy, as some people like Saylor, refer to it as, it's like a time capsule. And I believe that in the future it'll be worth more and more, as opposed to what can you purchase today in terms of property or a store of value where you can pretty much guarantee what it's going to look like and how much it'll be worth, 10, 20, 100 years from now. You buy a house, the houses are taxed, you keep cash in the bank, it just loses because of inflation. Who knows what's going to happen with the stock or equity or company. So it's just, for me, it's that idea that it's just this pristine form of collateral and value and energy that you can lock away. And it's truly scarce and it's decentralized, controlled by no one. No one can ever confiscate it or take it away from you. And I think it's just, I truly think it's a genius and amazing invention. Like for people that are not familiar with the space, I can understand why some of us probably sound crazy, right? Because I was just like, well, they're talking about how it's like fire, like the printing press, but you learn about it enough and it's hard not to equate it to that. The internet, I feel like people underestimated and undervalued how much it would transform our lives and the way that we conduct business, the way we communicate. And now I truly see Bitcoin as the internet of money. It's gonna change how we transact value, how we measure value. And I would love to see this world where we stop having, everything go up in value just because the supply of money is growing, right? We take the monopoly board and we just increase the amount of paper that's there, but the amount of houses stays the same. So of course, obviously the price of the houses are going to go up. Now we're going to flip that on its head. And, I've heard Jeff Booth talk a couple times in the last couple conferences we were at about this idea that, houses will fall to their utility value. They're not just going to go up because the paper's going up. And could you imagine a world like that where things are based on what they're actually worth?
What they're worth.
And and as technology enables more and more deflation in our lives, I wonder what that world looks like, because to me, it's again, one where we can actually have the time and the energy and the ability to focus on things that make the world a better place, as opposed to that survival mode of, I just got my hair cut a couple days ago. My hairdresser is now also a real estate agent because she can't make enough as a hairdresser in Beverly Hills. And she makes, and arguably in Beverly Hills, she makes pretty good money as a hairdresser. but like, it's still not enough. And all of us have to become, day traders on the side, or, invest in a property that's going to be an Airbnb. And it's like, why does it have to be so hard? And it doesn't have to be. And
with
that's
this world that we've become so much more productive. We have computer technology to leapfrog us forward. Now we have, we used to have one person at home and one person at work. Now both people have to be at work, and now they got to have side hustles and passive income and Airbnbs. And it is ridiculous. And when you look at it from a mathematical perspective, because you said that at the top of the show, the denominator is an infinity sign. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Like they can continue to print. And in Bitcoin, the denominator is 21 million, period. Yeah. End of story. It will never be more than that. So obviously the only thing that can move in that environment is the numerator, the top number. Yep. So that is going to bring the value. So as utility starts to adjust, you're going to see Bitcoin at some point slowly at first, and then suddenly, as we say, all of a sudden it will take off. And I think it'll take off with institutional adoption, maybe some modicum of regulation, sovereign adoption, like is happening in El Salvador and other places. I mean, I'm hopeful, and I think it's the internet of money, like you said so well. Yeah. And people, it'll change the world. It'll solve a lot of problems, but we have to just let it, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not only hopeful, but that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I'm a big believer that you have to actively create the world you want to live in. And that's what we're doing. That's why I'm really inspired by this community, and why, you say I'm the Energizer Bunny. I'm working so hard. I really believe in this. And I think that there are a lot of people who go into technology and the big tech companies with this idea that you want to change the world. I feel like that's like the pitch for all of these apps and companies that are created in Silicon Valley, right? True. We're going to change the world. We're going to do this. Well, that's how I really see Bitcoin. And I want to live in a more meritocratic world where there's more opportunity for everyone, so that ideas can come to the table, as opposed to, we're limiting, I feel like, our potential when people have to work so hard in order to just survive, because the goalpost again keeps moving, and the very, very few, the elites, sort of have whatever they need, and they pool at the top, but they're a small amount that have this huge portion of the pie, and everyone else is just trying to make it and survive. And I think it's really impacted society. I think it's impacted, male-female roles in relationships. Yes. I feel like it's impacted how young people view opportunity and their futures. And so I'm very inspired by it, and I will work really hard to try to fight for this world that I think will be better for everybody.
No, you're inspiring as well. And you're humble from what I can see. And you still, realize there's probably a lot left that you can learn, and a lot more of our message that we can get to the world. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions more specific to investment, and then we'll start to wrap up if you'd like. Sure. But why should an investor have some exposure to Bitcoin? Because there's a lot of investors are like, oh, it's a technology, it's going to be hacked. And, I've got this money in my pocket. They don't have this in their pocket, which is a Bitcoin, if you can see it. My dad bought me this Bitcoin before he died. And he goes, here's Bitcoin. I go, Dad, this doesn't exist. He goes, yeah, but it's a gift. He knew, right? But he was just funny. And so, why should an investor have some exposure to Bitcoin? I don't recommend everybody just mortgages their house and puts it all into Bitcoin. God, no. But I think we should have some. Why should they? What would you say to that from a non-hedge fund manager perspective?
Sure. I mean, well, obviously for me, because I've studied it so much, it's because you're betting on the future. You're betting on a technology network at its earliest stages that has a pretty pristine history, never been hacked, immutable, permissionless, borderless, censorship resistant. And this is where, the truth of the matter is we live in a digital world. We live in the information era now. And so it's kind of like betting on the internet in the 1990s and sort of having the foresight to see that every business will transform into an online business, and everyone's going to be communicating via email and talking via Zoom. It's really kind of being able to see that and place your wager on if you think that that's the world we're going to live in. And so you're right. People don't have to put their whole life savings into it. I'm a big believer in, your portfolio, your business, it's your risk tolerance. I started with very little, and then I learned, I grew. Not only did it appreciate, so it expanded in my portfolio in terms of percentage on its own, but also I grew in my conviction, and I understood it more. I understood how it worked. I sort of, learned how the engine actually works so that I can appreciate why the car drives me from point A to point B. But I mean, I just see it as something that is, again, a technology network that's completely decentralized with an asset that's truly scarce for the first time, digital scarcity. It's never been created or achieved before. And if you believe that there's a 1% chance that it could take over or it could, appreciate in value and be something that is really, really meaningful, then put 1% in. If you think there's a 5% chance, put 5% in. But I think zero is the wrong call. And again, there are very few things right now where you can look into the future and know for certain that asset will remain the same. Wherever you are, that mathematical certainty of Bitcoin is something that I truly believe in. Again, it's a place on the ledger. It's a portion of a plot of 21 million plots of land in digital, in cyberspace. So I see it as something that is a must for every portfolio. And it depends on your risk. Obviously, it is more volatile. You have to be able to tolerate that volatility. I always say you have to have a long time horizon. This isn't something you put in to take out in a year. It's not something you put in to take out even in 2 years. I look at it as the 4, 5, 10-year savings technology. And I think it's really important because we need to get back into that idea of saving in hard money, as opposed to betting on a bunch of stocks or becoming real estate landlords or putting your money in cash, which is basically allowing it to evaporate slowly and melt like an ice cube. So for me, Bitcoin is probably one of the safest bets that I personally feel like I'm making with my money.
It's so well said. So why don't we kind of put a comma on it there? I'd love to have you back sometime and talk about the freedom that Bitcoin gives you. And maybe we can even talk about the great reset from the WEF or the energy of Bitcoin and how it's, maybe our saving grace on cancel culture. I don't know. But certainly you've given us a nice overview and even some specifics on how it can help investment, maybe help people understand it a bit more. I always say, if you want to learn about something, you have to invest it. You have to have your money in it. I don't know how far you and I would be if we didn't put our money in, if we were just talking theory, but I could tell you when your money's in it, you learn. And then you realize, 100%. Oh my God, look at how much more I have to learn. Like today, there's something going on that, with FTX and some other stuff. And we always say, not your keys, not your coin. We wouldn't have learned that if we didn't invest it, even $5 the first time, right?
Yes, absolutely. There are so many lessons to be learned. I think investing is just a fascinating space in general, and it feels safer to buy in the green, right? When it's 69K, but it's actually safer to buy in the red. And so many people, when it was at the high, said to themselves, oh, I wish I had bought when it was 20. I'll buy when it goes lower. And now it goes lower. And I look at our human psychology, right? Like, should I buy? I think it might go even lower. I don't know. But stop thinking about it that way. I truly see, Bitcoin, a lot of the big prominent voices that I talk to, they make an excellent point, which is that when you look at the amount of money that's in the system at large with equities, properties, real estate, rare art, all of it, it's like hundreds of trillions of dollars. Gold is just a $10 trillion pool. If we just reach gold, that's $500,000 of Bitcoin. Yeah. That's a pretty good, asymmetric bet.
Risk, yeah.
And again, with how much sovereign debt there is, where if you study the cycles of our economy just in the last couple of decades, from the tech bubble, the equities bubble there, to the real estate bubble, to the now everything bubble, where we've kicked the can up and tossed it to the sovereign debt level, there really is no solution other than printing and debasing the currency. So you need an escape. You need an escape hatch and a valve that's going to protect you from that in the long run. And I really see Bitcoin as that. And so if people start to learn and appreciate the mathematical, genius behind it, behind proof of work and the difficulty adjustment, you start to say, oh, wow, this is truly what we needed, and we have it, and we should embrace it. And that's how I feel about it. So I hope to encourage more people to learn, but you're right. Just get started with a little, send $1 of Bitcoin to someone, or pay for something. If you go to a place and they accept Bitcoin, pay for something in Bitcoin, and just open up your mind to something that could potentially solve a lot of the problems that exist today.
Yeah. When we look at Amazon, 25 years ago, they were selling books and everybody went, books, who's going to buy books? Yeah. Okay, maybe they'll buy books. Now look at what we buy on Amazon.
Yeah,
it's like
everything.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I think Bitcoin's like that. So I listen to your podcast. It's called Coin Stories. If you are a podcast listener, or if you're not a podcast listener, you owe it to yourself to listen to this. I think it's an award-winning. Have you won awards?
Not for the podcast, but from my previous news career. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be winning awards for this podcast because
Thank
the
you.
interview quality of your guests and the way you interact with them is just absolutely phenomenal. So it's called Coin
Thank you.
Stories, and that's available on Apple, Spotify, and all the ones that I know about. And then you have a new show called Hard Money. Tell us about Hard Money, and what is Hard Money?
Yeah, so Hard Money is a news headline-driven show. It also has original reports about Bitcoin adoption. And we really just wanted to provide something we didn't see within the industry and media landscape, which is a show and a media outlet that talks about the economy, what's happening with the Fed and inflation and rate hikes and, you know, growing wealth disparity, but also that understands Bitcoin and can sort of bridge those two worlds. And I feel like there's a lot of Bitcoin content out there, and there's a lot of news and finance shows and all that. But the two worlds rarely come together, and a lot of media folks out there, unfortunately, are not educated in Bitcoin. So that's what we're trying to do. We update you on everything from what's happening with the Federal Reserve and you know, the cost of living and energy crisis around the world, but also from the frame of reference of understanding Bitcoin and how it's trying to solve some of these issues. And then, yeah, Coin Stories has been such an amazing experience because it started with just interviewing some of these really prominent, massive, big names that I admired and learned from. How, you know, how did they get their start? Why do they believe in Bitcoin? And now we talk about everything, you know, macro, what's going on in the current world? How can Bitcoin fix this? What's happening? So I would love for people to check it out. And thank you so much for having me.
It's been my pleasure. And the last thing is, how can people get in touch with you if they want?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Nat Brunell, and my DMs are open. And then you can also reach out to me on my website, talkingbitcoin.com.
Natalie, thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure and an inspiration to me, and I know the listeners and viewers on my show. And like I always say to everybody, never give up your power in your health, your wealth, or your time. See you next time on the next edition of the Wealth Architect Podcast. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Wealth Architect Podcast with Mark Yegge. Follow us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Share and tell your friends. See you soon.